When Jackson Miller plunged into the ice-cold reservoir to rescue a teenage girl trapped in a submerged car, he never imagined he was saving the daughter of Sophia Harrington, one of Wall Street's most powerful investment magnates. With his wheat fields withering under the worst drought in decades, and the bank just days from repossessing his fifth-generation family homestead, Jackson awakened 1 week later to the rumble of 12 black SUVs kicking up dust on his gravel driveway. The fleet brought Sophia Harrington herself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. CEO of Harrington Global Investments, carrying a proposition that would not only save his farm, but transform the entire struggling community of Riverdale. Jackson Miller's weathered hands moved methodically. Across the ancient irrigation controls, he'd repaired more times than he could count. At 47, the lines etched deep around his eyes told the story of countless dawns spent watching the horizon, waiting for rain that rarely came anymore. His broad shoulders, still powerful despite the years of physical labor, hunched slightly as he adjusted a valve, willing the precious water to stretch just a little further across his parched fields. "Come on, old girl," he murmured to the pump that wheezed and protested beneath his touch. "Just hold together a few more weeks. That's all I'm asking." The relentless Midwestern sun beat down on the back of his neck as he worked, but Jackson barely registered the heat. 25 years working this land had calibrated his body to the rhythms of the seasons, though those rhythms had grown increasingly unpredictable. Climate change, the agricultural extension agents called it. "Bad luck," said his neighbors. "The end of family farming," whispered the bankers. From across the field, the deep bark of his Australian shepherd, Rusty, caught Jackson's attention. The dog raced toward the house, signaling a visitor long before the vehicle came into view. Jackson straightened, one hand shading his eyes as he peered toward the long driveway that connected his isolated farmhouse to the county road 2 miles away. A battered blue pickup appeared through the heat haze, its familiar profile announcing Jackson's younger brother Daniel before he pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust. Jackson sighed quietly. Daniel rarely brought good news these days. "Figured I'd find you out here trying to make water appear out of thin air," Daniel called as he stepped from the truck. At 42, Daniel shared Jackson's strong jawline and dark hair, though his was untouched by gray. His hands were smoother, too, the hands of someone who worked with numbers and computers at the agricultural cooperative in town, rather than soil and machinery. "Water doesn't appear by magic," Jackson replied, wiping sweat from his brow with a faded bandana. "But these fields won't irrigate themselves." The brothers walked side by side toward the 2-story white farmhouse that had been in the Miller family since 1897. Its wraparound porch sagged slightly on the western corner, despite Jackson's attempts to level it last spring, and the paint was peeling in places, but the structure remained as solid as the day their great-great-grandfather built it with timber hauled by horse-drawn wagon. Rusty circled their legs as they walked, occasionally darting ahead as if to hurry them along. The dog had appeared on Jackson's porch during a blizzard 3 winters ago, half-starved and limping from an injured paw. Now he was as much a part of the farm as the ancient oak tree that shadowed the house. "Coffee's still hot," Jackson said. As they entered the kitchen, its worn linoleum floor clean but faded from decades of use. The house was modest, but meticulously maintained inside, with handcrafted furniture built by generations of Miller men, and preserved despite the financial pressures that might have sent such heirlooms to auction. Daniel settled at the oak table, while Jackson poured 2 mugs of coffee from the pot that perpetually simmered on the stove. On the kitchen walls hung family photographs spanning decades, Jackson and Daniel as boys helping their father with harvest, their mother standing proudly beside her prize-winning preserves at the county fair, their grandparents posing with the farm's first tractor, Most prominently displayed was a sepia photograph of their great-great-grandfather Elijah Miller standing before the newly built farmhouse in 1897, his expression solemn beneath a broad-brimmed hat. "How's Sarah?" Jackson asked, referring to Daniel's wife as he set the mugs down. The rich aroma of strong coffee filled the warm kitchen. "Good. Busy preparing for the new school year. She's got 32nd graders this fall. Biggest class Riverdale Elementary's seen in years." Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm mug, his expression growing serious. "Jack, I ran into Bill Thorne at the co-op this morning." Jackson tensed at the mention of the bank manager's name. Bill Thorne represented First Riverdale Bank, which held the increasingly precarious mortgage on Miller Farms. "What did Thorne want?" Daniel hesitated. "He was asking about your wheat, how—" "It's holding up in the drought." Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd hoped to have a little more time before word about his struggling crops spread through Riverdale's gossip network. The town barely topped 2,500 residents, and financial troubles traveled faster than the trains that bisected the community, carrying other farmers' grain to distant markets. "My business with the bank is private," Jackson said, his tone sharper than he'd intended. "Not in Riverdale, it isn't," Daniel countered, leaning forward. "Jack, if you're having trouble making the payment this quarter—" "I'm handling it." Jackson stood abruptly and moved to the window overlooking his western field. The wheat stood in neat rows, but even from here he could see the strain in the plants, the slightly yellowed tinge that spoke of insufficient water despite his careful irrigation. This drought-resistant variety, developed specifically for changing climate conditions, had cost him nearly everything to plant after last year's crop failure. It was his last chance to save the farm. The truth Jackson couldn't bring himself to share with his brother was that Miller Farms was 3 payments behind on its mortgage. The bank had granted extensions based on the projected yield of his wheat crop, but their patience was wearing thin. If he couldn't deliver a harvest substantial enough to make a significant payment by the end of August, First Riverdale Bank would begin foreclosure proceedings, ending 5 generations of Miller stewardship of this land. "You know," Daniel said carefully, "the offer still stands. Sarah and I have that money from her parents. We could—" "No." Jackson cut him off firmly. "We've been through this. I'm not taking your savings. This farm has been in our family for 5 generations. It's my responsibility now." Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration, a gesture so like their late father that Jackson had to look away. "It's not just your responsibility, Jack. It's your entire life. When's the last time you even left the county? Took a day off? The farm was never meant to be a prison." Jackson remained silent, staring out at the fields that had shaped his existence. How could he explain to Daniel that the farm wasn't a prison, but his purpose? That despite the hardships, the droughts, the equipment breakdowns, the rising costs and falling crop prices, he still felt the same connection to this land that had sustained their family through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless personal tragedies. Millers don't quit. That's what their grandmother had said countless times during Jackson's childhood. Her words had carried him through the death of their parents in a car accident 15 years ago, through his divorce from Rebecca when she could no longer bear, the isolation and uncertainty of farm life, through the lonely nights when the enormity of preserving the family legacy threatened to crush him. "The wheat looks good," Jackson said finally, changing the subject. "Drought-resistant variety is holding up better than I expected. If the irrigation system can keep going and we get even a little rain in the next 2 weeks, I should have enough yield to make the payment to the bank and have seed money for winter planting." Daniel looked skeptical, but didn't press further. He knew his brother well enough to recognize when a subject was closed. Instead, he reached into his messenger bag and withdrew a small wrapped package. "Almost forgot. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Early birthday present, he said, pushing it across the table. Found it online. Jackson unwrapped it carefully to find a framed photograph, a professionally restored version of the oldest family photo they possessed. It showed their great-great-grandfather Elijah standing with his wife Hannah beside the first section of fence they'd erected on the property years before the house was built. They stood tall, despite their visible exhaustion, their expressions reflecting determination and hope. Sarah found someone who specializes in restoring old photographs, Daniel explained. Thought you might like to have it for the wall. Jackson ran his finger along the frame, emotion tightening his throat. In the photo, Elijah Miller stood straight-backed, despite the visible strain of carving a farm from virgin prairie, his eyes reflecting the same resolve Jackson saw in the mirror each morning. Thank her for me, Jackson managed, setting the photograph carefully beside the family Bible that contained records of births, deaths, and harvests, stretching back over 120 years. They talked for another hour about Daniel's kids, about the town's declining population as more young people left for cities, about the weather forecast that continued to predict record heat and minimal precipitation. What remained unspoken was their shared fear that Jackson might be the last Miller to farm this land, that a legacy spanning 5 generations might end on his watch. The next morning dawned hot and airless, the kind of stifling day that makes Midwestern farmers eye their fields with concern. Jackson rose before sunrise, as he had every day since childhood, moving through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. Coffee brewing, rusty fed, weather report checked, hearty breakfast of eggs and toast to fuel the day's labor. Today's kitchen radio hummed with the regional farm report as Jackson laced up his worn work boots. Farmers across Riverdale County should prepare for what meteorologists are calling a potentially historic heat wave, the announcer warned. The National Weather Service has issued an excessive heat warning, with temperatures expected to reach 105 degrees by midday. Residents are advised to limit outdoor activity and check on elderly neighbors. Jackson frowned, moving to the window. The cloudless sky promised another scorching day, the early sun already fierce as it climbed above the eastern tree line. He'd lived in the Midwest long enough to know that weather forecasters often exaggerated, but the withered grass around his mailbox confirmed what his instincts already told him. This heat wave was different, more intense than anything in recent memory. He grabbed his worn leather journal from the kitchen drawer, the latest in a series that stretched back to his great-grandfather's time. Each Miller man had kept meticulous records of plantings, harvests, weather patterns, and costs. Jackson flipped to his most recent calculations, studying the numbers that would determine his future. The wheat crop covered 350 acres of his 500-acre farm. At current market prices, and with the exceptional yield the drought-resistant variety promised, he would clear enough to make the overdue mortgage payment with perhaps a small cushion for fall planting, but only if he could harvest before the plants succumbed to the relentless heat. The margins were razor-thin, leaving no room for error or equipment failure, both of which had plagued him these past 2 seasons. 3 consecutive years of unpredictable weather had depleted his financial reserves. The unexpected breakdown of his combine last fall had forced him to rent equipment at exorbitant rates, and all the while, the bank's patience had worn thinner with each late payment and request for extension. Jackson closed the journal with a decisive snap. If today was going to be as brutal as predicted, he needed to check the irrigation system immediately. Some sections of his wheat were further along than others. Perhaps parts could be harvested early, not ideal for maximum yield, but better than losing everything to the heat. Outside, Rusty bounded ahead as they made their way toward the fields that stretched toward the eastern property line. Even at 7 a.m., The air felt unusually heavy and still, the calm before the inevitable storm of heat. Jackson walked the perimeter, stopping occasionally to examine the wheat with experienced hands. "Almost there, aren't you?" he murmured, running his fingers along the golden stalks. The crop wasn't quite ready. Another 10 days would yield the perfect harvest, but parts of the northernmost section were further along than others. Jackson made rapid calculations as he walked. With his aging combine, he could perhaps salvage 50 acres before the worst heat hit in the coming days. Not enough to satisfy the bank entirely, but perhaps enough to demonstrate good faith. Enough to buy more time. His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The screen showed Bill Thorne's name from First Riverdale Bank, and Jackson's stomach tightened. When the bank called this early, it was rarely good news. "Mr. Thorne," he answered, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Jackson." The banker's tone was professionally cordial, but with an unmistakable edge of finality. "I've just come from the loan committee meeting. I wanted to call you personally before the official notice is sent." Jackson stopped walking, his free hand instinctively gripping a nearby fence post. "What notice?" "I'm sorry, Jackson." For the first time in their long acquaintance, Thorne used his first name, a shift that signaled the conversation had moved beyond business. "The committee has voted unanimously to deny any further extensions. Your final payment is due August 31st, as stipulated in your last agreement. If payment isn't received in full by close of business that day, foreclosure proceedings will begin September 1st. The wooden post splintered slightly under Jackson's grip. "Bill, you know the situation. The wheat is almost ready. I just need—" "It's out of my hands," Thorne interrupted gently. "The decision is final. With this heat wave moving in, well, the committee felt the risk was too high. I truly am sorry." After the call ended, Jackson stood motionless at the edge of his field, the phone still clutched in his hand. Around him, the wheat he'd nurtured from seed stood in perfect rows, oblivious to the economic forces threatening their caretaker. Rusty circled back, sensing Jackson's distress, and pressed against his leg with a soft whine. "It's okay, boy," Jackson said automatically, though nothing was okay at all. The reality he'd been fighting finally crashed over him in waves he could no longer hold back. Unless a miracle occurred, in just over a month, Miller Farms would belong to First Riverdale Bank. 5 generations of history, struggle, triumph, and tradition would end with him. Jackson Miller would be the last of his name to work this land. He looked around at the fields his family had tended for over a century, where his father had taught him to drive a tractor at age 8, where his grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl by implementing innovative soil conservation techniques, where his great-grandfather had diversified into wheat when corn prices collapsed in the 1920s, where Elijah Miller had staked his claim and built a legacy from nothing. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though to whom, his ancestors, the land itself, or his own future, he couldn't say. By mid-morning, the predicted heat had arrived with punishing intensity. The temperature climbed relentlessly, the air so dry it seemed to pull moisture from everything it touched. Jackson had formulated a desperate plan. He would attempt an early harvest on the most mature section of his wheat before the extreme temperatures damaged the crop beyond salvaging. It wouldn't be enough to save the farm, but it might provide leverage for one final appeal to the bank. He spent hours preparing his combine, repairing and adjusting every component to ensure it would run efficiently in the race against the blistering heat. As the temperature approached 100 degrees, Jackson paused his work to answer another call, this time from Daniel. "Just checking that you're staying cool," his brother said without preamble. "They're saying this could be the worst heat wave in 50 years. The town's opened cooling centers at the library and community center." Jackson glanced at the combine. He'd just spent hours readying. "Can't do that. I'm planning to salvage what wheat I can before this heat destroys it." There was a long silence on the line. "Jack, that's not safe." You know how quickly heat exhaustion can set in when you're working machinery in these temperatures. Don't have much choice, Jackson replied, his voice flat. Got a call from Bill Thorne this morning. Committees denied any more extensions. Payments due August 31st, or they start foreclosure September 1st. Another silence, heavier this time. I'm sorry, Jack. We could still... No, Jackson cut him off. We've been through this. I'm not taking your money, Daniel. It's not just your money. It's Nathan and Emma's college fund. This is my responsibility. Has been since Dad died. I took it on, and I'll see it through, whatever that means. Stubbornness isn't going to save the farm, Daniel said, frustration edging into his voice. Maybe not, but it's all I've got left. Jackson ended the call before his brother could respond, knowing he'd been harsh but unable to face Daniel's concern or offers of help. Not today. By early afternoon, the heat was almost unbearable. The temperature soaring past 103 degrees, driven by a hot, dry wind that offered no relief. The weather radar showed no hint of rain, just an expanding mass of angry red covering the entire region. Jackson worked frantically, harvesting what he could from the northernmost field, loading his truck with bushels of wheat that, while not at peak maturity, might still fetch a reasonable price. It wasn't much. Perhaps a tenth of what he'd need to satisfy the bank. But it was something. As he worked, the heat seemed to intensify, bending the air above the fields into shimmering waves. Jackson drank water constantly, knowing the danger of dehydration, but even so he could feel his strength ebbing as sweat poured from his body faster than he could replace the moisture. Jackson had just loaded the last of what he could salvage, when his phone chimed with an emergency alert. Excessive heat warning upgraded. Temperatures to reach 108 degrees. Extreme danger. Seek shelter immediately. Do not engage in outdoor activities. He glanced toward Riverdale Reservoir, which bordered his eastern property line. The water level had dropped considerably in recent weeks, the normally expansive lake now shrunken, revealing wide bands of cracked mud around its perimeter. Common sense told Jackson to secure what he could and retreat to the farmhouse, where the old stone walls and basement would provide some relief from the oppressive heat. But the thought of abandoning his equipment, his crops, his last chance to salvage something from this disaster kept him working despite the increasingly dangerous conditions. That's when he heard it, faint but unmistakable over the heavy stillness of the scorching afternoon. A car horn blaring repeatedly in the universal signal of distress. Jackson turned toward the sound, squinting through the heat haze. It seemed to be coming from the county road that ran along the northern edge of his property, near where it curved around Riverdale Reservoir. Every survival instinct told Jackson to ignore the sound, to focus on saving what he could of his own livelihood. In these conditions, venturing away from shade and water would be foolhardy at best, potentially fatal at worst. He had already loaded his pickup with the small portion of wheat he'd managed to salvage, the bare minimum he would need to show the bankers proof that he hadn't given up. But something else, something deeper than self-preservation, moved Jackson's feet in the direction of the distress call. His father's voice echoed in his memory. In farm country, where help might be an hour away even in good weather, looking out for your neighbors isn't charity, it's survival. The journey to the road was punishing. Within minutes, Jackson was soaked with sweat despite the bone-dry air, his breathing labored as he trudged across fields baking under the merciless sun. What should have been a 15-minute walk stretched to nearly 30 as he struggled through the wheat, occasionally stopping to lean against fence posts as waves of dizziness threatened to overwhelm him. When he finally reached the county road, the scene confirmed his worst fears. Just where the road curved around the reservoir's edge was a luxury sedan, sleek, black, and clearly not built for rural backroads despite its all-wheel drive. City car, city driver, Jackson thought grimly as he approached. As he drew closer, The true danger of the situation became immediately apparent. The vehicle had slid partially off the road, where the asphalt had buckled from the extreme heat. Its right wheels hung precariously over the reservoir's edge, where the water had receded to leave a steep drop-off. The car was balanced on the crumbling shoulder, tilting at an angle that suggested the slightest movement might send it tumbling down the embankment. The horn had stopped, which worried Jackson. Either the battery had died, or the driver had given up. Neither was a good sign. "Hello!" Jackson shouted as he approached, his voice hoarse from the dry air. "Anyone there?" He reached the driver's side door and peered through the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman in her 40s, slumped against the steering wheel, clearly unconscious, her face flushed an alarming red. In the back seat, strapped into a safety seat and wide-eyed with terror, was a teenage girl of perhaps 15 or 16. Jackson pounded on the window, startling the girl into awareness. She fumbled frantically with her seatbelt, then leaned forward between the front seats to unlock the driver's door. "Please help us," she gasped as Jackson wrenched the door open against the angle of the car. "My mom, she just passed out. The air conditioning stopped working and it got so hot." Jackson assessed the situation quickly. The woman's condition was alarming, heat stroke, almost certainly, but the car's precarious position was the most immediate threat. Any moment, the soft shoulder could give way, sending the vehicle tumbling down the embankment. "What's your name?" Jackson asked the girl, trying to keep his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Lily," she answered, her voice trembling. "Okay. Lily, I'm Jackson. We need to get you and your mom out of this car right now. It's not stable." He reached across to check the unconscious woman's pulse, rapid but present. "What's your mom's name?" "Sophia," Lily replied. "Sophia Harrington. We were trying to get to the interstate, but the GPS routed us this way as a shortcut. Then the car started overheating and Mom pulled over." The name stirred a vague sense of recognition in Jackson, but there was no time to place it. The ground beneath the car made an ominous cracking sound as more of the heat-baked shoulder began to crumble away. "Let's get your mom first," Jackson said decisively. "I need you to stay very still. Any movement could send the car over the edge." Moving with careful precision, despite his own light-headedness from the heat, Jackson reached across Sophia Harrington and unbuckled her seatbelt. She was a slight woman, dressed in expensive-looking summer clothes now soaked with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot to the touch, classic signs of severe heat exhaustion progressing to heat stroke. "Lily, I'm going to carry your mother out. Once she's safe, I'll come back for you. Don't move until I tell you to, understand?" The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face, but remaining remarkably composed given the circumstances. With strength, born of urgency, Jackson gathered the unconscious woman in his arms and backed carefully out of the car, feeling the vehicle shift ominously as he withdrew. He carried Sophia several yards away from the unstable ground and gently laid her in what little shade was offered by a lone roadside tree. "Stay with your mom," Jackson instructed as he helped Lily from the car, the vehicle groaning with each subtle shift in weight. The moment Lily's feet touched solid ground, there was a sickening sound of earth giving way. They both turned to watch as the luxury sedan slid over the edge, tumbling down the embankment before coming to rest half submerged in the reservoir. "My bag!" Lily cried, suddenly remembering. "My phone! My EpiPen! They were in my backpack!" Before Jackson could respond, a fresh wave of dizziness washed over him. The brutal heat and his exertion had pushed him dangerously close to heat exhaustion himself. He staggered slightly, bracing himself against the tree trunk. "We need to get out of this heat," he managed to say, looking at Sophia's alarmingly flushed face. "My farmhouse is about half a mile from here. Can you help me with your mother?" Lily nodded bravely, though fear flickered in her eyes as she looked at her unconscious mother. Together, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher using Jackson's work. shirt and broken branches from the roadside tree. They placed Sophia on it and began the arduous journey across the wheat fields toward the Miller farmhouse. The trek was nightmarish. The afternoon sun beat down without mercy, the temperature still climbing as they struggled through the field. Sweat poured down Jackson's face, his vision occasionally blurring as he fought against his own body's growing distress. Lily stumbled repeatedly but refused to stop, her concern for her mother driving her forward despite the punishing conditions. "Almost there," Jackson encouraged, as the white farmhouse finally came into view. Rusty, spotting them from the porch, raced across the field, circling them with anxious barks, as if sensing the emergency. By the time they reached the house, all three were in various states of heat-related illness. Jackson's hands shook as he fumbled with the door, his normally nimble fingers clumsy with dehydration and fatigue. Inside, the thick stone walls of the old farmhouse provided immediate, blessed relief from the sun, though the interior was still uncomfortably warm. "The basement," Jackson directed, leading them toward the cellar door. "It's the coolest place in the house." The basement of the Miller farmhouse had been built as a root cellar by Jackson's ancestors, its walls a foot thick, and partially set into the earth. Even on the hottest days, it remained relatively cool. They carefully carried Sophia down the wooden steps and placed her on the old daybed that Jackson kept there for summer naps during the worst heat. Working quickly despite his exhaustion, Jackson wet towels with cool water from the basement's old hand pump and placed them on Sophia's forehead, neck, and wrists. He instructed Lily to do the same for herself while he connected a battery-powered fan to create air circulation. "Will she be okay?" Lily asked, her voice small as she looked at her mother's still form. "Heat stroke is serious," Jackson answered. "Honestly, but we're doing everything right. Her breathing is steadier already." He took stock of their situation. The power was still on, though the rural electric cooperative had warned of potential rolling blackouts during the heat wave. His ancient landline phone still worked, a rarity in the age of cell phones, but one Jackson had maintained specifically for emergencies. "I'm going to call for help," he told Lily, making his way back upstairs to the kitchen where the old rotary phone hung on the wall. He dialed the rural emergency service, but after several minutes of conversation, his face grew grim. "What is it?" Lily asked when he returned to the basement. "Ambulances are stretched thin with heat emergencies all over the county," Jackson explained, trying to keep his tone even. "They'll get here when they can, but it might be several hours." Lily's face crumpled. "But Mom needs a doctor." "We'll take care of her," Jackson assured her, though concern gnawed at him. Sophia's condition was stable but serious. "I've dealt with heat illnesses before. The main thing is to cool her body gradually and get fluids into her when she wakes." Up for the next hour, they maintained their vigil in the cool basement, replacing the towels as they warmed and monitoring Sophia's breathing. Jackson forced himself to drink water and made sure Lily did the same, knowing they were both suffering from the effects of heat exposure themselves. As the shadows lengthened outside, Sophia finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked around in confusion, taking in the unfamiliar stone walls and the anxious faces hovering above her. "Lily?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, Mom," Lily replied, grabbing her mother's hand. "We're safe." "What?" Sophia tried to sit up but fell back weakly. "Easy," Jackson cautioned. "You've had heat stroke. You need to stay still and cool." Sophia's eyes focused on him, confusion giving way to recognition of a stranger. "Who?" "This is Jackson," Lily explained quickly. "He saved us. The car went into the reservoir, but he got us out and brought us here to his farm." Comprehension dawned slowly on Sophia's face. "Thank you," she whispered, the simple words carrying profound gratitude. "Just rest," Jackson advised, helping her sip water from a glass. The ambulance will be here eventually, but rural service is overwhelmed right now. As Sophia drifted back into sleep, a normal one this time, not the dangerous unconsciousness of heat stroke, Jackson felt the full weight of the day's events crash down on him. He'd saved these strangers while his own livelihood washed away in the heat. The wheat he'd harvested early would spoil in the truck, if not delivered to the grain elevator soon. But he couldn't leave these people alone, especially with Sophia's conditions still precarious. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to save his farm, he might have lost his last chance by choosing to help strangers in need. Yet looking at Lily's relieved face as she watched her mother's more normal breathing, Jackson couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. "You're a farmer?" Sophia asked later that evening, having woken more lucid and able to sit up slightly with Lily's help. The basement was now illuminated by battery-powered lanterns, the electricity having failed as predicted. Jackson nodded, passing her another glass of water. 5 generations on this land. "Wheat?" she asked, noticing the grain dust on his clothes. "Mostly, yes, some corn and soybeans in rotation. It looks like beautiful land," she commented, her voice stronger, though still weak. "Are you part of one of the corporate agricultural groups?" Jackson shook his head. "Independent, family farm, though not for much longer, I'm afraid." Something in his tone made Sophia study him more carefully. "Financial trouble?" Jackson hesitated, unused to discussing his problems with strangers, but something about the directness of her question broke through his reserve. "The bank's foreclosing at the end of the month. Too many bad seasons, and this heat wave just finished what was left of my crop." Sophia absorbed this information with a thoughtful expression. "I'm sorry to hear that. Family farms are the backbone of this country." There was something in her manner, a quiet authority, an articulate precision, that didn't match Jackson's initial impression of a lost city driver. Now, in the lantern light, he noticed details he'd missed before. Her simple, but clearly expensive watch, the quality of her casual clothes, her manicured hands. "You said your name is Sophia Harrington?" he asked, a memory stirring. She nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. "Yes, Harrington Global Investments." Recognition finally clicked. Sophia Harrington was one of the most powerful investment bankers on Wall Street, known for her work in agricultural futures and sustainable farming initiatives. Even in Jackson's isolated corner of rural America, her name was familiar from financial news and farming publications. "You're a long way from Wall Street," he observed, unable to hide his surprise. Sophia's smile widened slightly. "I grew up in Nebraska. Farm country is in my blood, even if my life took a different turn. Lily and I were on our way back from visiting my mother in Kansas City when the heat advisory rerouted us." Before Jackson could respond, Rusty's urgent barking from upstairs signaled a visitor. Moments later, heavy footsteps on the basement stairs announced the arrival of paramedics, their faces red and sweaty under their caps. "Sorry for the delay," the lead medic apologized. "It's been non-stop all day." As they examined Sophia and prepared to transport her to the regional medical center, Jackson found himself strangely reluctant to see them go. These strangers had appeared in his life so briefly, yet their departure would leave him alone again. With the crushing reality of his situation, "Mr. Miller," Sophia said formally as the paramedics helped her toward the stairs. "I owe you my life and my daughter's. How can I possibly thank you?" Jackson shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sophia said with quiet certainty. "Not anyone would risk heat stroke themselves to save strangers. Not everyone would sacrifice their own interests to help others." She reached into the small purse the paramedics had retrieved from her car and handed him a business card. "Please call me when this heat breaks. I'd like to continue our conversation about your farm." Before Jackson could respond, they were gone. the ambulance's siren fading into the distance as it carried Sophia and Lily away from Miller Farms and back to their world, a world that seemed impossibly distant from Jackson's current reality. Jackson slept poorly that night, his body aching from the day's exertion and his mind churning with thoughts of the farm's impending loss. Outside, the heat barely relented even after sunset, the air hanging heavy and still over the parched fields. His dreams, when sleep finally came, were a jumbled mix of sinking cars, wilting wheat, and Sophia Harrington's enigmatic suggestion. About continuing their conversation, morning brought little relief from the heat. The weather service predicted another day of record-breaking temperatures, with no break in sight for at least a week. Jackson rose stiffly at dawn, his muscles protesting as he moved through his morning routine. The events of the previous day seemed almost dreamlike in the harsh morning light, but Sophia Harrington's business card on his kitchen table confirmed the reality of it all. Jackson examined the card more closely now. Heavy cream cardstock, minimalist design, the Harrington Global Investments logo embossed in silver. Sophia Harrington, CEO and founder, it read, with direct contact information that few people likely possessed. He set the card aside with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Whatever Sophia had meant by continuing their conversation, Jackson couldn't imagine how a Wall Street investment banker's interest would translate into anything meaningful for a failing family farm in the Midwest. The day stretched before him, filled with the grim task of assessing the damage from the heat wave. The wheat he'd harvested early and loaded onto his truck had indeed begun to spoil in the extreme heat. The remainder of his crop stood brittle and desiccated in the fields, much of it now past saving even if the temperatures dropped immediately. His irrigation system, pushed beyond capacity for weeks, had finally failed in several sections, the ancient pumps burned out from continuous operation. As Jackson walked his property, Rusty trailing dejectedly at his heels in the brutal heat, he found himself doing mental calculations of what it would cost just to maintain the farmhouse after the land was gone. Perhaps he could keep a small parcel around the house itself, sell the rest to one of the corporate farming operations that had been buying up family farms throughout the county. The thought made his stomach twist with something like physical pain. His cell phone rang, startling him from his dark thoughts. The screen showed Daniel's name. "Jack, thank God," his brother's voice came through, thick with relief. "We've been trying to reach you since yesterday. The news is showing that half the county lost power in the heat wave. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Jackson assured him, realizing he'd forgotten to call his brother after the rescue. "Power's out, but the generators running the essential systems had some unexpected visitors yesterday, though." He explained briefly about finding Sophia and Lily Harrington stranded by the reservoir, their car accident, and the heat emergency, downplaying the danger to himself in the retelling. "Sophia Harrington?" Daniel repeated, incredulous. "The Sophia Harrington? Jack, she's one of the most influential people in agricultural investment. What was she doing on Miller Road?" "GPS shortcut gone wrong," Jackson replied, still finding it somewhat surreal himself. "Daniel, it doesn't matter. They're good now, back to their world, and I'm still here watching everything our family built turn to dust." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again, his voice gentle. "The bank called me this morning, Jack." Jackson stopped walking, tension immediately coiling in his chest. "Why would the bank call you?" "Because I'm listed as next of kin on your documents. Bill Thorne wanted to make sure you understood all your options before the foreclosure deadline." "There are no options," Jackson said flatly. "We both know that." "There's always the offer." "Don't," Jackson cut him off. "I appreciate it, Daniel, I do. But taking your family's savings won't save this farm. It would just postpone the inevitable and leave all of us poorer for it." The conversation ended, with promises to check in again soon, But Jackson felt the distance between himself and his brother expanding, not from any lack of love, but from the growing reality that their lives were diverging irrevocably. Daniel had built a life away from the crushing burden of the farm. Jackson had no identity apart from it. For the next 5 days, Jackson threw himself into salvage work, repairing what equipment he could, documenting the crop loss for insurance claims that would cover only a fraction of the actual damage, and preparing for the hard conversations to come with the bank. The heat wave continued unabated, breaking records across the Midwest and turning daily life into an endurance test. He didn't call the number on Sophia Harrington's card. Whatever fleeting connection had formed in that basement during her recovery seemed insignificant now against the overwhelming reality of his situation. The bank had sent the official foreclosure documents, their clinical language laying out in black and white how 5 generations of Miller history would be erased in a matter of weeks. On the 6th day after the rescue, as Jackson was sorting through old photos and family documents in the stifling heat of the farmhouse attic, deciding what to keep when the time came to leave, he heard the distinctive sound of vehicles on his gravel driveway. Peering through the dusty attic window, he froze in disbelief at the sight below. A convoy of 12 identical black SUVs was pulling up to his farmhouse, their sleek lines and tinted windows incongruous against the weathered barn and sun-bleached outbuildings. As Jackson watched, the lead vehicle stopped, and a familiar figure emerged, Sophia Harrington, looking remarkably recovered from her ordeal, dressed in crisp linen pants and a light blouse that somehow didn't wrinkle in the oppressive heat. From another vehicle, Lily stepped out, immediately kneeling to greet an ecstatic Rusty who had raced to meet them. Jackson descended from the attic and stepped onto the porch just as Sophia reached the bottom step. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. The Wall Street CEO and the Midwestern farmer, 2 people from worlds that rarely intersected. "Mr. Miller," Sophia said finally, extending her hand, "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I tried calling, but it seems cell service is still unreliable in the area." "Ms. Harrington," Jackson replied, shaking her hand and noting the firm grip. "This is unexpected." A hint of amusement flickered in Sophia's eyes. "I imagine it is. May we come in? There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." Inside the farmhouse, with its ancient ceiling fans laboring against the heat, Jackson offered his unexpected guests water from his precious store of ice, luxury in the continuing power outage affecting much of the county. "You've recovered well," he observed, noting Sophia's vibrant energy that contrasted sharply with his last memory of her being carried semi-conscious to an ambulance. "Thanks to you," she replied, her tone sincere. "The doctor said without your immediate intervention, the outcome could have been much worse for both Lily and me." Lily, who had coaxed Rusty into the kitchen and was now lavishing attention on the delighted dog, looked up. "Mom's been talking about you non-stop since we got out of the hospital, Mr. Miller. She says you're exactly the kind of person she's been looking for." Jackson raised an eyebrow, looking back to Sophia. "Looking for?" Sophia set down her glass and leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of focused intensity that hinted at how she had risen to the top of the cutthroat world of investment banking. "Mr. Miller, Jackson, I'd like to explain why I've arrived with what must seem like an invasion force." She gestured toward the window where the line of black SUVs was visible. "Those vehicles contain my executive team, agricultural specialists, soil scientists, irrigation engineers, and sustainable farming experts." Jackson's confusion must have shown on his face because Sophia continued without waiting for a response. "For the past 2 years, Harrington Global has been developing an initiative called American Heartland Revival. We're identifying family farms with multi-generational expertise, but facing economic challenges due to changing climate conditions, market pressures, and corporate consolidation." She paused, studying Jackson's reaction before continuing. These aren't just investments for us. They're partnerships designed to preserve family farming while incorporating cutting-edge sustainable technologies. And you're telling me this because, Jackson asked, though he was beginning to understand the implications. Because Miller Farms fits our criteria perfectly, Sophia replied simply. 5 generations of agricultural knowledge, excellent soil, based despite recent drought conditions, strategic location near water resources, and most importantly, her gaze intensified, a farmer with the integrity and courage to risk everything to help strangers. Jackson shook his head, overwhelmed by the sudden change in his circumstances. Ms. Harrington, Sophia, please. Sophia, I appreciate what you're suggesting, but my situation is beyond partnerships or investment. The bank is foreclosing at the end of the month. The crops are destroyed. The equipment is outdated. This farm is... He struggled to say the words. This farm is finished. Not necessarily, Sophia countered, reaching into a slim leather portfolio she'd brought with her. After leaving the hospital, I had my team conduct a thorough analysis of Miller Farm's potential. We've also had preliminary discussions with First Riverdale Bank about your mortgage situation. Jackson stiffened. You spoke to my bank? Without my permission? As a potential investor, yes, Sophia replied unapologetically. I needed to understand the complete financial picture before making this trip. She slid a document across the table, professional, bound, with the Harrington Global logo. This is our initial proposal. In essence, Harrington Global would become a limited partner in Miller Farms, providing capital for debt clearance, equipment modernization, and implementation of drought-resistant farming methods. You would maintain operational control and majority ownership. Jackson stared at the document without touching it. Why? Why go to all this trouble for a farm you stumbled across by accident? There must be thousands of struggling family farms that would qualify for whatever program you're running. Sophia was quiet for a moment, considering her response. Then, to Jackson's surprise, she rolled up her left sleeve, revealing a series of faint but distinctive scars running from wrist to elbow. When I was 16, our family farm in Nebraska was failing during a drought, not unlike this one. My father had taken on too much debt, and the bank was foreclosing. He sent my mother and me to town for supplies one day, and while we were gone... She paused, the memory clearly still painful decades later. He went to the barn and took his own life, believing his insurance policy was the only thing that could save the farm for us. The kitchen fell silent, except for the labored whirring of the ceiling fan. Even Rusty seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, settling quietly at Lily's feet. The insurance company denied the claim, of course, Sophia continued after a moment. We lost everything, the farm, our home, and my father. I swore then that I would find a way to prevent other families from facing the same impossible choices. She gestured toward the SUVs outside. American Heartland Revival isn't charity, Jackson. It's sound business with a purpose. Family farms, like yours, have generational knowledge that's invaluable, but you're operating with one hand tied behind your back against corporate agriculture's resources. We provide the resources, you provide the expertise. Jackson's gaze shifted to the family photos on the wall. His parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all of whom had faced challenges and found ways to adapt and survive. His father had switched from traditional plowing to no-till methods when others thought it foolish. His grandfather had diversified into wheat when neighboring farms clung to corn alone and suffered for it. And what happens when climate change makes this land unviable regardless of technology? Jackson asked, giving voice to his deepest fear. What happens when your investors demand higher returns than a family farm can provide? That's all addressed in the proposal, Sophia replied, tapping the document. The partnership is structured with clear exit provisions, guaranteed minimum returns based on realistic projections, and built-in sustainability metrics. We're not looking for quick profits, Jackson. We're building a model for 21st century family farming that can withstand both environmental and economic pressures. Lily, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Mom doesn't usually bring me on business trips," she said, her young face serious beyond her years. "But she wanted me to see the farm and meet you again. She said some debts can't be repaid with money alone." Jackson looked between mother and daughter, seeing in their expressions a sincerity that cut through his initial skepticism. Still, decades of agricultural hardship had taught him to approach any proposal, especially one that seemed too good to be true, with caution. "I'd need time to review this," he said finally, touching the proposal for the first time, "and I'd want my brother and our family lawyer to look it over." "Of course," Sophia nodded, appearing pleased rather than offended by his caution. "We wouldn't expect anything less, but there is some time sensitivity given your bank's deadline." She rose from the kitchen table, smoothing her linen pants with a practiced gesture. "In the meantime, I'd like my team to conduct a more detailed assessment of your property, soil samples, water table analysis, equipment inventory, with your permission, of course." Jackson hesitated, then nodded slowly. What did he have to lose? At this point, "The land's been in my family for 5 generations, he said, his voice quiet but firm. "If we do this, and that's still a big if, I need to know it stays that way." "That's precisely what we want too," Sophia replied. "The miller. Name and legacy is what gives this farm its value to us. Without that, it would just be more acreage for corporate agriculture to absorb." As they stepped onto the porch, the team from the SUVs had already begun to organize themselves, setting up portable equipment and consulting digital maps of the property. Jackson watched them with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. 1 week ago, I was preparing to lose everything, he said almost to himself. Now this. Sophia stood beside him, following his gaze across the fields that stretched to the horizon. "Sometimes rescue comes from unexpected directions," she observed. "You taught me that rather dramatically, for the first time in longer than he could." Remember, Jackson felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, perhaps, but its distant cousin. The possibility that the Miller farming legacy might not end with him after all. "Your daughter," he said suddenly, remembering. "Something. She mentioned an EpiPen when her bag went into the reservoir. Is she all right?" Sophia smiled, touched by his concern. "She has severe allergies, but we got replacements at the hospital. Thank you for asking." As a team of soil scientists approached, clipboards and sampling equipment in hand, Sophia turned to Jackson with an expression of surprising deference. "This is your land, Jackson. You tell us where to start." For a moment, he stood on the porch of the home his ancestors had built, looking. Out at the fields they had tended through war, depression, and dust bowls. Then, straightening his shoulders, Jackson Miller stepped forward to show Sophia Harrington's experts exactly what 5 generations of farming knowledge looked like in action. The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity unlike anything Miller Farms had seen in decades. Sophia Harrington's team worked with military precision, transforming the struggling farm into a hive of analysis and planning. Soil scientists collected samples from every field. Agricultural engineers assessed the aging equipment and irrigation. Systems and technology specialists mapped the entire property using drones and satellite imaging. Throughout it all, Jackson found himself in an unfamiliar position, at the center of attention yet somewhat sidelined as experts pored over the land he knew intimately. He divided his time between answering endless questions about crop rotations, water patterns, and soil variations, and quietly reviewing the partnership proposal with growing amazement at its scope. By the second evening, with Sophia's team having established a temporary command center in his barn, complete with satellite internet and air conditioning units powered by portable generators. Jackson finally called his brother. "You need to come out to the farm," he said without preamble when Daniel answered. "And bring Emma and Nathan too. There's something you all need to see." "Jack, what's going on?" Daniel asked, concern evident in his voice. "The feed store said there's been all kinds of vehicles and equipment heading out to your place." "It's easier to explain in person," Jackson replied, still processing the rapid changes himself. "Just come tomorrow morning if you can." The next day dawned mercifully cooler than previous ones, though the heat wave was far from broken. Jackson rose early as always, but instead of facing his daily routine alone, he emerged from the farmhouse to find Sophia already awake, sitting on his porch swing with a laptop balanced on her knees. "Good morning," she greeted him, closing the computer. "I hope you don't mind. The view of sunrise from here is spectacular." Jackson nodded, noticing how the early light caught her profile, softening the sharp business acumen into something more contemplative. "My great-grandfather positioned the house specifically for that view, said a farmer should start each day with something beautiful." "A wise man," Sophia commented, her gaze lingering on the golden light spreading across the wheat fields. "Have you had a chance to review our proposal?" "I have," Jackson acknowledged, leaning against the porch railing. "It's comprehensive." "But you have concerns," Sophia surmised, reading his hesitation. "A few," he admitted. "The technology integration timeline seems aggressive. And I'm not convinced about the shift to partial organic certification in the North Fields. The soil there has always been the most challenging." Rather than dismissing his concerns, Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Valid points. The timeline can definitely be adjusted. As for the North Fields, our soil analysis actually suggests they might be better suited for organic methods than your currently productive areas, given the mineral composition we're seeing." Before Jackson could respond, Rusty barked an alert, and they both turned to see Daniel's SUV coming up the drive, followed by a second vehicle, Bill Thorne's sedan from First Riverdale Bank. "I invited him," Sophia explained, noting Jackson's surprise. "I thought it might be helpful to discuss the mortgage situation directly, with all parties present." Jackson felt a flicker of annoyance at her presumption but swallowed it down. This woman was potentially offering salvation for his farm. He could tolerate some overstepping of boundaries. Daniel emerged from his vehicle with his teenage children, Nathan and Emma, their expressions reflecting equal parts curiosity and bewilderment. At the transformed farm, Bill Thorne followed, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he approached the farmhouse. "Jack!" Daniel called, eyeing the collection of high-tech equipment, temporary structures, and bustling specialists with undisguised amazement. "What in the world is going on here?" Jackson performed introductions, watching his brother's eyes widen in recognition when Sophia Harrington extended her hand. Bill Thorne practically stuttered in his greeting, clearly unprepared to meet a Wall Street powerhouse on a foreclosing farm property. "Mom," Lily called, emerging from one of the temporary structures and waving a tablet. "The satellite imaging just came through. The watershed analysis looks even better than we hoped." As Lily approached, Jackson noted how she had integrated with the team over the past 2 days, her natural intelligence and curiosity making her an eager participant rather than just an observer. She had formed a particular bond with Emma, despite their 5-year age difference, and the two girls quickly fell into conversation about the farm as if they'd known each other for years. "Perhaps we should move this inside," Sophia suggested, gesturing toward the farmhouse. "We have quite a bit to discuss." Around the kitchen table that had hosted 5 generations of Miller family meetings, decisions, and crises, Jackson now found himself at the center of a business discussion that would determine the fate of his heritage. Sophia presented a streamlined version of the proposal for Daniel and Bill Thorne, emphasizing the partnership structure that would preserve Miller family ownership while bringing in Harrington Global's resources. The immediate concern, of course, is the foreclosure deadline, Sophia explained, turning to Bill Thorne. Our proposal includes retiring the current mortgage in full, with Miller Farms then assuming a new, more favorably structured loan directly with our financial division. Bill Thorne, still somewhat starstruck, cleared his throat. That would certainly resolve the current situation. The bank would have no objection to a full payoff. I'm sure they wouldn't, Daniel muttered under his breath, earning a sharp look. From Jackson, the partnership offers several advantages beyond just addressing the immediate financial crisis, Sophia continued, smoothly ignoring the tension. Our agricultural technology division has developed drought-resistant farming methods that have shown remarkable success in similar climate zones. We'd implement those here, along with water management systems that could reduce irrigation needs by up to 40%. As she spoke, Lily and Sophia's team presented digital renderings on tablets, showing how the farm could be transformed, not into something unrecognizable, but into an enhanced version of itself. The fields would remain where they'd always been, but with improved irrigation, soil amendments, and strategic crop rotation. The equipment would be upgraded but suited to the specific needs of the property rather than generic industrial solutions. The goal isn't to turn Miller Farms into a corporate showcase, Sophia emphasized, correctly reading Jackson's lingering concern. It's to make it a working example of how family farms can thrive in changing conditions by selectively adopting new methods while maintaining traditional knowledge. Nathan, who had been quiet throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke up. Will it still be our farm? Could I work here someday if I wanted to? The question, coming from Jackson's 16-year-old nephew, who had previously shown little interest in agriculture, caught everyone by surprise. Jackson felt something catch in his throat as he looked at the boy, Daniel's son, but with the Miller jawline and the same serious eyes that stared back from generations of family photographs. Sophia turned to Nathan with a gentle smile. That's exactly the point of this partnership. Without it, there might not be a Miller farm for your generation. With it, we're creating a sustainable operation that could support your family for generations to come. She looked back to Jackson. But ultimately, that's a decision for your uncle. This is his farm, his legacy to preserve or transform as he sees fit. All eyes turned to Jackson, who sat silently for a moment, feeling the weight of 5 generations on his shoulders. He thought of his stubborn resistance to change that had nearly cost him everything, of his father and grandfather who had adapted when necessary to preserve what mattered most, of the strange twist of fate that had brought Sophia Harrington to his farm through an act of simple human decency. There would be conditions, he said finally, his voice steady. The Miller name stays on the farm. Operational decisions are made jointly, not dictated. And if this partnership ends for any reason, the land reverts fully to my family without encumbrances. Instead of balking at these demands, Sophia nodded approvingly. Those conditions are already built into the proposal, Jackson. We don't want to own Miller Farms. We want to partner with it because of what it is and what it represents. She extended her hand across the table. Do we have an agreement in principle? Jackson looked around the kitchen, at Daniel's cautiously hopeful expression, at Nathan's unexpected interest, at Emma's excitement, at Bill Thorne's barely concealed relief at finding a solution that wouldn't require him to foreclose on a century-old family farm. Finally, his gaze returned to Sophia Harrington, the unlikely catalyst for this moment of transformation. With a clarity he hadn't felt in years, Jackson reached across the table and clasped Sophia's hand firmly. We do. The kitchen erupted in reactions. Daniel clapping him on the shoulder, Emma and Lily exchanging excited high fives, Bill Thorne immediately pulling out his phone to call the bank's loan committee. In the midst of it all, Jackson caught Sophia's eye, and something passed between them. a quiet acknowledgement that went beyond business, beyond rescue and gratitude, to something more fundamental about human connection and unexpected second chances. Later that afternoon, as legal teams began drafting formal agreements and technical specialists continued their assessment of the property, Jackson found himself standing at the edge of his wheat field with Sophia. "Your team works quickly," he observed, watching as irrigation experts examined the existing system with an eye toward enhancement rather than replacement. "When necessary," Sophia replied, "though I should warn you, the real work is just beginning. Transforming a farm like this while preserving its character isn't a quick process." "Nothing worthwhile on a farm ever is," Jackson said, bending to scoop up a handful of soil. His family's soil for 5 generations, and now, potentially, for many more to come. "Why did you really come back?" he asked suddenly, the question that had nagged at him since she'd appeared with her fleet of black SUVs. "With your resources, you could have sent a team, made an offer through intermediaries. You didn't need to come yourself." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her gaze on the distant horizon, where heat still shimmered above the parched earth. "When I was lying in that hospital bed," she said finally, "the doctor told me that without your immediate intervention, I likely would have suffered permanent damage from the heat stroke. Lily might have been stranded alone at the reservoir for hours." She turned to face him directly. "Some debts can't be delegated, Jackson. Some things you need to do yourself." She glanced back toward the farmhouse, where activity continued unabated. "Besides, American Heartland Revival isn't just another investment vehicle for me. It's personal. Each farm we partner with is part of healing something broken in rural America, and perhaps in me as well." Jackson nodded, understanding better than she might realize. The land had a way of getting into your blood, of becoming part of your identity. For Sophia, whose connection to farming had been severed so traumatically, perhaps this program was but restoring something lost, not just for the farmers she helped, but for herself as well. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, "not of the wealth or success, but of what you're doing with it." Sophia's expression softened with surprise and something like gratitude. Few people in her world would have thought to make such a personal connection, or would have dared to mention her father so directly. "I hope so," she replied simply. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Jackson Miller stood side by side with Sophia Harrington, farmer and financier, 2 people from different worlds brought together by chance, crisis, and choice. Behind them, the past 5 generations of Miller farmers seemed to watch from the weathered farmhouse. Ahead of them, the uncertain future of agriculture in a changing climate waited to be shaped. Between them, a partnership was forming that might just save not only Miller farms, but also serve as a model for preserving the best of America's agricultural heritage while embracing the innovations necessary for its survival. All because Jackson had chosen to help strangers in need, placing their welfare above his own desperate situation. "We should head back," Sophia said eventually, checking her watch. "My legal team will have the preliminary agreements ready for review." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Rusty and Lily came bounding across the yard to meet them, the teenager and the dog having formed their own unlikely friendship over the past days. "Mom!" Lily called excitedly. "Nathan showed me his grandfather's old tractor in the back barn. He says it might still run with some work. Could we restore it as part of the project?" Sophia looked to Jackson with a raised eyebrow. "That would be Mr. Miller's decision." "Jackson," he corrected gently. "And yes, I think restoring that old John Deere would be a fitting symbol of what we're trying to do here, honoring the past while building something new." Lily beamed, already planning the restoration in her mind. "I'll tell Nathan. He said he might want to learn farming for real, not just the theory they teach in agricultural classes." As she raced back toward the barn with Rusty at her heels, Jackson felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Not just the immediate threat of foreclosure, but the heavier burden of being the last Miller, the end of a lineage. Perhaps, through this unexpected turn of events, he had become not the end of his family's farming tradition, but a bridge to its future. "You've given me back my farm," he said to Sophia as they neared the house. "But more importantly, you've given it a future." Sophia shook her head, her expression serious. "You did that, Jackson, the moment you chose to save strangers instead of your harvest. I'm just making sure your decency doesn't go unrewarded in a world that too often doesn't value the right things." As they reached the porch steps, Daniel emerged from the house, legal papers in hand, ready to begin the detailed work of crafting this new partnership. Behind him, through the window, Jackson could see Nathan bent over the kitchen table, asking questions of an agricultural engineer, his young face alight with curiosity about the land his family had farmed for generations. Perhaps, Jackson thought as he prepared to step from the past into a transformed future, this was what his ancestors had been protecting all along, not just the land itself, but the possibility it represented, the connection it forged between generations, and the values it instilled in those who worked it with respect and care. 1 week after Sophia Harrington's arrival with her fleet of black SUVs, Miller Farms had undergone a remarkable transformation. The partnership agreements had been signed, the bank had received full payment on the outstanding mortgage, and a sustainable financing structure was in place. On the land itself, a profound change was unfolding. Irrigation specialists implemented a smart water management system, soil scientists introduced targeted amendments, and agricultural engineers modified equipment to work efficiently with the farm's specific conditions. Most surprisingly to Jackson, his role hadn't diminished, but expanded. His generations of knowledge proved invaluable even to Harrington Global's specialists with their advanced degrees and technology. The satellite imaging shows significant variation in soil moisture in the northwest section, one young agronomist explained, showing Jackson a tablet with colorful heat maps. "But we can't determine the cause." "There's an underground spring there," Jackson replied, "plus my grandfather built clay drainage pipes in the 1940s. They don't show up on your scans because they're non-metallic." The young man stared at him with newfound respect. "That would have taken us weeks to figure out." Such exchanges created a productive synergy between traditional farming knowledge and cutting-edge agricultural science. That morning, Jackson stood with Sophia and Daniel on the rise behind the farmhouse, surveying the activity below. "I still can't believe it," Daniel said, watching a team installing soil moisture sensors. "A week ago, you were facing foreclosure. Now Miller Farms is becoming a showcase for the future of family farming. Technically, it's Miller-Harrington Agricultural Partnership now," Jackson corrected, the name change his own idea, a recognition of the new entity built on the foundation of the old. "The technical transformation is impressive," Sophia acknowledged, "but what matters most is preserving the human element. The most sophisticated agricultural technology is worthless without experienced farmers to implement it appropriately." She glanced at her watch. "Back to New York for quarterly board meetings, but Lily will stay another week if that's all right. She's become quite attached." She smiled. "And to Rusty." As if summoned, the Australian shepherd appeared, followed by Lily and Emma deep in conversation. An unlikely friendship had blossomed between the New York teenager and the rural Midwestern girl. "Of course she can stay," Jackson said. "The guest room is hers for as long as she wants, and Rusty would be devastated if she left too soon." "She's never shown this kind of interest in anything related to my work before," Sophia observed. 3 days ago, I found her reading agricultural journals at midnight. Daniel laughed. "Emma, too. She's suddenly talking about agricultural science programs for college." They watched as the girls examined something in the soil, their heads bent together in serious discussion. "The real success won't be measured in bushels per acre," Sophia said thoughtfully. "It will be in moments like that, young people discovering there's a future in family farming." Jackson nodded. For years, he had carried the burden of potentially being the last miller to farm this land. Now there was a path forward, not just for himself, but possibly for Nathan, Emma, and perhaps even Lily in some capacity. After Sophia's departure via helicopter, Jackson found himself alone for the first time in days. He wandered into the old barn, where his grandfather's John Deere tractor stood partially disassembled as Nathan had begun the restoration project. Running his hand along the tractor's faded green body, Jackson felt the presence of his ancestors. Would they approve of the partnership that had saved the farm, but fundamentally changed its operation? "They adapted too in their time," he murmured, remembering how each generation had embraced necessary changes to keep the farm viable. This partnership was simply the next evolution. Later, as the setting sun bathed the white farmhouse in golden light, Jackson could almost see his ancestors on the porch, his father cleaning equipment while his mother shelled peas, his grandfather whittling cedar whistles, his great-grandparents rocking side by side after a long day in the fields. The vision faded, replaced by Lily and Emma racing across the yard with Rusty, laughing as they headed toward the house. Behind them, Nathan emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands, a gesture so like Jackson's father that it caught in his throat. The past and future of Miller Farms converged in that moment, 5 generations of heritage preserved not in amber, but in living, evolving form. The farm would change, as it always had, adapting to new challenges and opportunities, but its essence, the connection to the land, the knowledge passed from generation to generation, the values of stewardship and perseverance, would remain. Jackson Miller had dived into dangerous heat to save a stranger's daughter, never imagining he was rescuing the child of someone who would help him preserve his family's legacy. Now, as he watched the children who might represent the farm's future, he understood that sometimes saving others and saving yourself were one and the same act. 3 months after the establishment of the Miller-Harrington Agricultural Partnership, the transformation of the once struggling farm was nothing short of remarkable. The withered fields that had faced certain ruin under the punishing heat wave now showed promising signs of recovery, with strategic cover crops preparing the soil. The next season's planting, the aging equipment had been selectively upgraded, maintaining the workhorses that still performed well, while replacing those that had become liabilities. On this crisp autumn morning, Jackson Miller stood at the edge of his eastern field, watching. As the sun rose over land that had been in his family for 5 generations, and would now remain so for generations to come. Rusty sat attentively at his side, the dog's ears perking up as the sound of vehicles approaching broke the dawn silence. Today marked a milestone for the partnership. The first phase of the modernization project was complete, and Sophia Harrington was returning with a film crew to document the work as part of the broader American Heartland Revival Initiative. Jackson had mixed feelings about the publicity. While he understood its importance for expanding the program to other struggling family farms, he was uncomfortable being portrayed as some kind of rural hero. The dramatic narrative that had emerged in certain media outlets, the humble farmer, diving into danger to save a CEO's daughter, only to be rewarded with a business partnership that saved his farm, felt reductive, missing the genuine human connections and shared values that had made the partnership work. The now familiar convoy of black SUVs appeared on the horizon, though fewer in number than during Sophia's first dramatic arrival. Jackson watched their approach with a slight smile, remembering his initial skepticism and wariness. how quickly things had changed. Sophia emerged from the lead vehicle, dressed more casually than during her previous visits in jeans and a light jacket that seemed chosen for the farm environment rather than for appearances. Behind her came Lily, who immediately raced ahead to greet Rusty with the enthusiasm of a true friend rather than a casual acquaintance. "Mr. Miller," she called, her face bright with genuine happiness as she approached. "We brought you something." From New York. Jackson had grown fond of the teenager during her extended stay on the farm, impressed by her intelligence and her unexpected affinity for rural life. She had returned to New York for school eventually, but not before establishing herself as an honorary member of the Miller family, complete with her own designated chair at the kitchen table. "Jackson." Sophia greeted him with a warm handshake. As she reached them, "The place looks incredible already." "Healthy soil responds quickly when given the chance," Jackson replied, gesturing toward the fields where cover crops grew in careful patterns designed to restore nutrients and prevent erosion. "Nature wants to heal itself. We just have to provide the right conditions." As the film crew began setting up their equipment, Jackson led Sophia on a walking tour of the recent improvements. They had spoken weekly via video conference as the partnership progressed, but this was her first in-person visit since the initial implementation phase. "The water usage metrics are even better than we projected," Sophia noted as they examined one of the smart irrigation nodes. "The data from here is already informing adjustments on 2 other partner farms in Nebraska and Montana." "It's not just the technology," Jackson explained. "It's knowing exactly when and where to apply it. The sensors help, but there's still no substitute for walking the fields daily, feeling the soil between your fingers." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly the balance we're trying to achieve with this program. Technology enhancing tradition, not replacing it." They paused at the crest of a small rise that offered a view across most of the property. In the distance, Nathan and Emma could be seen helping the farm's 2 new part-time employees. Local high school students interested in agricultural science set up demonstration areas for the filming. "Your nephew has quite a gift for this," Sophia observed. Lily mentioned they've been corresponding about his college plans. Jackson nodded, pride evident in his expression. "He's applying to agricultural programs for next fall. Wants to study sustainable farming methods and bring that knowledge back to the partnership. Who would have thought?" The transformation in Nathan had been one of the most unexpected and gratifying outcomes of the past months. The teenager, who had previously shown little interest in his family's farming heritage, had discovered a passion for agricultural innovation, spending weekends and school holidays working alongside Jackson and the technical team. "And the partnership has been working well from your perspective?" Sophia asked, her tone careful. "The balance of decision-making, the integration of our team with your methods." "Better than I could have imagined," Jackson admitted. "Your people, listen, they don't assume they know better just because they have advanced degrees. That makes all the difference." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the activity below. Despite their vastly different backgrounds and daily realities, Jackson had discovered in Sophia a kindred spirit. Someone who understood at a fundamental level the value of connection to the land, the importance of preserving agricultural knowledge across generations, and the delicate balance between innovation and tradition. "We've received over 200 applications from family farms for the next phase of American Heartland Revival," Sophia said eventually. "Your story has resonated deeply across rural America." Jackson frowned slightly. "I hope they're applying because the program makes good business sense, not because they're expecting some fairy tale ending." Sophia turned to face him directly. "The fairy tale, as you call it, is the least important part of what's happening here. What matters is that we've created a viable model for family farm survival in the 21st century, one that honors the past while embracing the future. Her expression softened, though I must admit I never expected that my daughter would develop an interest in agricultural science because of all this. Lily's school counselor nearly fell out of her chair when she requested information about 4-H clubs in New York City. Jackson laughed, picturing the scene. Some of Emma's friends think she's lost her mind too, suddenly talking about soil composition and water conservation instead of fashion trends. This unexpected connection between the young people in their lives, crossing geographic, cultural, and economic boundaries, symbolized everything the partnership was meant to achieve: building bridges between rural and urban America, between traditional knowledge and technological innovation, between generations past and those to come. As they made their way back toward the farmhouse where the film crew was setting up for interviews, Sophia gestured toward the old barn where Nathan's restored John Deere tractor now gleamed in fresh paint. "That's what we should feature prominently in the documentation," she said. "Not just the high-tech sensors and modern equipment, but the restoration of that tractor, honoring the past while building for the future." Jackson nodded in agreement. "That's exactly what my grandfather would have wanted to see." Later, as cameras rolled, and Jackson somewhat awkwardly recounted the story of that scorching day when he'd found Sophia and Lily in distress by the reservoir, he made sure to emphasize the partnership's substance over its dramatic origins. "What matters isn't how this particular connection began," he said, looking directly into the camera with the straightforward gaze of a man more comfortable with actions than words. "What matters is that family farms across this country deserve the chance to continue their legacy while adapting to new realities. The knowledge accumulated over generations is too valuable to lose, too important to our national identity and food security to let slip away because of economic pressures or changing climate conditions." When the filming concluded and the crews began packing their equipment, Jackson found himself standing on the porch with Sophia, watching as Lily, Emma, and Nathan demonstrated the restored tractor for the camera operators. "Thank you," Sophia said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. "For what? You're the one who saved my farm." She shook her head. "For reminding me why I started Harrington Global in the first place. After years of boardrooms and balance sheets, it's easy to lose sight of the fundamental purpose: to make meaningful differences in real people's lives." Jackson understood. In the agricultural world, too, it was easy to become fixated on yield numbers and profit margins, forgetting the deeper purpose of working the land, stewarding it for future generations, producing food that sustained communities, preserving a way of life that shaped character and values. "I should be thanking you," he replied, "not just for the partnership, but for helping me see that adaptation isn't betrayal. My ancestors changed their methods countless times to preserve what mattered most. This partnership is just the latest evolution in that tradition." As the sun reached its zenith over Miller-Harrington Agricultural Partnership, casting its light on fields that would now continue sustaining this family for generations to come, Jackson Miller thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of human decency, putting others' needs before his own desperate situation, had not only saved Sophia and Lily Harrington, but had unexpectedly preserved his family's legacy. "Next season's planting will be here before we know it," Jackson said, looking out over the land with anticipation rather than dread for the first time in years. "And for once, I'm actually looking forward to it." Sophia smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "That, Jackson Miller, is the true measure of our success." As our camera pulls back from Miller Farms, now alive with activity and renewed purpose, our narrator returns. When Jackson Miller plunged into dangerous heat to save a teenager trapped in a stranded car, he couldn't have known he was also rescuing his family's 5-generation legacy. His story reminds us that in our most Selfless moments. When we put others' needs before our own, we sometimes find unexpected paths to salvation. In a world where family farms are disappearing at an alarming rate, the Miller-Harrington Partnership offers a blueprint for preserving agricultural heritage while embracing the innovations necessary for survival. It stands as testimony to the power of human connection across different worlds and the unexpected ways our lives can intersect to create something greater than ourselves. If Jackson's journey has touched your heart today, remember that throughout rural America, families just like his are fighting to preserve a way of life that has shaped this nation since its founding. Their struggle is part of our shared heritage, a heritage worth protecting through thoughtful partnership between traditional wisdom and modern innovation. This is Rebecca Collins for Lives Transformed, reminding you that sometimes what appears to be the end of a cherished tradition may actually be the beginning of its revival in a new and sustainable form. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.